you would see them in a room, you'd have violins. You have first violins, second violins, the violas, cello, the basses behind them. And then behind that, behind your violas in the center and off to the right a little, left and right a little bit, you'd have your flutes and your oboes. And behind them, you'd have your clarinets and bassoons, and that would be your B-flat clarinet, your bass clarinet, your bassoon, and your contrabassoon. And then from that on, you can place, for me, if I'm doing a live, or live orchestra, I'll either have the French horns in the center on, behind the woodwinds. The woodwinds will be on risers going back. The violas are on the floor. The high woodwinds, which would be the flutes and oboes, they're on a low riser, about 8 inches. And behind them, about 18 inches high on another riser, is the low woodwinds. And then on a higher riser behind them sometimes would be the French horns. And sometimes there's as many as 6 or 8 French horns. The other way is I'll have the French horns over on the left side and the brass on the right side. So it'll be trumpets, trombones, and tuba on that side. So they kind of balance off this way, left and right. So try balancing your stuff that way. And then your percussion, try to keep your timpani centered if you can. And I'm guilty of this too, because sometimes I'll set up my orchestra where the timpani is over on the left side or the right side. But for the most part, I like to keep the timpani in the center and then the big drums on either side of that. So I have the weight there, because I use Decatree array, which is 3 Omni mics over the podium and 2 mics wide and then 2 mics in the surround. So this helps me focus that. So yeah, try setting up as if you're recording a live orchestra. Learn where the people sit and then place them that way. And,
I totally agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
I went to listen and watch an orchestra like two weeks ago. They were playing a symphony by Mahler. And actually the horns were on the left. So I mean, now I know because I saw them, but let's say if I try to do differently, I try to just to reverse what you said. Let's say I try to put the horns on the right and then the other brass on the left. What except for a real classical conductor who is going to hear it from the start. But what kind of bad result can I get?
What kind of bad reverb? Or,
no, bad result.
Oh, bad results is that, well, I mean, it'll just sound, I mean, it should sound fine, but if they were live players, they would argue with me about being on the left side. The brass players always want to be on the right side. The French horns will either be in the center or the left.
Okay.
But that being said, it all depends on how you want to set that up. If you want to set them up on the left and the horns on the right, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so one last question about placing, and then I leave.
That's fine. That's what we're here for.
So when you mix a drum, well, I mean a drum kit, do you mix it like you are in the audience, or like you are the drummer?
I mix it like I'm in the audience.
Okay.
Because I'm looking at the drummer, and it is low toms here, his high toms here. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Every now and then I will mix drummer's perspective, which is a little differently, but that's fine, But for the most part, I mix from audience perspective. That's just
okay.
I want to be like I'm looking at him, and I want to hear it the way I would see him. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's a question expanding that one, and this says, how do you place the sections in space without creating phasing issues? Normal panning or stereo imager, like the Waves S1?
I would use, you're talking about, let's see.
The same question, spacing instruments.
Placing instruments. Well, I would place them by panning to where they have to go. If you're the other one, using a stereo imager, is not really panning them anywhere. It's just you're just making them left and it's totally different than panning something. Mm-hmm. When you pan something, you're physically placing it where you want it to be, and that's how it should be set up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You might get into problems if you start using a stereo imager on every track. Mm-hmm. That'll be problematic. So set it up that way. Then if you like, if you're dealing with only a stereo mix, you can put your stereo imager at the very end of the mix before you print it, and you can play with that so you can get your stereo mix to open up or close that way. Yeah. Like I said, those two MS plugins I mentioned earlier would work great on your stereo mix. So, yeah. Great. Guys,
Hey, Bobby.
Yep.
Sorry if you've already answered this. I've been monitoring the stream, so
okay, yeah.
in and out. But I wanted to ask you: do you prioritize panning or EQ when you're starting a mix?
Yes. What I'll do is I'll look at what I have to do. I'll do all my panning first.
Okay.
I get yeah, because I don't want to start EQing when things aren't where they're supposed to be.
Right.
Because what happens is if you wait, you'll find out that you could be EQing something that didn't need to be EQ'd because it's sitting on top. It's in the wrong place. So get your panning straight up as where you want things to go or be placed in the mix in your space, because you have this huge stereo field in front of you, all this big space there. So set them up where you want them to be, and then that's your width. Now, to get the depth of that before you even, you can EQ at that point to see what needs to be fixed. But once you have the width, the depth of the mix is achieved by the amount of reverb you put on the sections. And like I said earlier in the conversation, was the more reverb something has on it, the farther back it's going to be. So you can place things in the mix by the amount of reverb, even though it's the same reverb that you're using. It's just the amount. That's why I use aux sends. There's an aux send on every channel going to the same reverb. And, all my orchestra tracks will have, 2 reverbs, so I can pick and choose. My rhythm tracks, my drum tracks, sometimes I'll have as many as 4 reverbs just on the drum track. So I get to play with that stuff. So, but yeah, so panning first, get it set up, run it, listen to it, then add your EQ and compression that you think you need. And then start putting the space in by adding a little reverb here and there. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that with the aux sends?
Yeah.
Thing you said. You said that you use aux sends, which I do too, to basically mix in the amount of reverb you want.
Yes.
But then you also talked about multiple reverbs. Isn't multiple reverbs that you're fading in and out the same thing as an aux send that you're doing?
Yeah. I have. So let's say I have aux send 1 going to TC1, aux send 2 going to TC2. And they show up, then they're independent sends,
right,
and independent returns. So they're separate from each other. And the only thing that then by fading them in and out, the master, not the auxes, you're not fading the auxes, you're only fading in the returns, which is, you have 5 channels from one reverb, 5 channels from the other. So if you have one reverb that's playing, say the staccato stuff, the short reverb is going, and then we go boom into something else, and then you just bring in the other one. You're bringing in the master. The 5 channels. You're not adjusting all the auxes. That would be crazy, unless you have them all in a group, and that doesn't work.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
When you return your reverbs, they come up on faders. Some people like to send directly off the fader. I don't, unless it's something that, like the only time I ever really do that is when we add a track at the last minute. And I have to create a track or stem to send it to, then I'll just put the reverb on the fader. I'll send from right there. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, because that's what I've been doing in my Logic sessions. Is I'll have a send from each track with it.
Well, I do have a send from each track, but I don't have the reverb, the actual reverb bus on there. But sometimes I'll have to add it at a last minute thing. So that's the reverb send on its own here. It has nothing to do with the other reverbs. And again, I'll show you that when we go to my screen here. I'll show you how I have it set up.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, but for me, auxes are the way to go. And any more?
Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah. Hey, right.
Okay. Hi. Sorry. I was just wondering. Coming from the orchestration side of like traditional orchestration and trying to make the transition over to film side. Other than the orchestration, I know you're mentioning things about how the orchestra is panned, for instance, and how it's somewhat different than how we hear it. Is there any other things that I should be aware of to differentiate from the traditional sense in how film music is orchestrated, balanced? You know, maybe the balancing sections are a little bit different than how they are in traditional sense in terms of weight. So on.
Basically, film music is sort of quasi-classical in the sense that if you have an orchestra out there, as far as a setup goes, you can use a traditional setup, or you can, you work with the composer. If you're not the composer, say, I want to have this set up this way. I mean, I've done crazy stuff where I've had the violin set up on the right, and then the violas and cello, the basses and cello on the left, that kind of stuff. But set it up where the way you think you want to hear it. Is if it's a live recording, obviously it's a live recording. Obviously for samples you can set it up any way you like, but in a live situation, I mean, you can, because film is so varied, you can have it set up any way you want as long as it works with your score and it works with the film. That's the thing, yeah.
All right, thanks.
So there's really the thing about setting up an orchestra in a traditional sense is kind of basically sort of become sort of like a sort of de facto standard. Everybody wants to set up that way. But I mean, I've done stuff where I've had, like I said, the basses and the cello in the center of the room, and the violas and the violins split left and right. So it all depends on what you want to do. But before I do anything like that, I always make sure that I talk it over with the composer and the orchestrator. One of the biggest problems I've had in the past is where, someone came in and they want the strings set up antiphonally. So we have first here, seconds here. And so you know what, well, how many violins do you have? Well, I only have 8 violins, so we'll set up 4 here and 4 there. How many divisis do you have? Well, there's 4 divisis, 4 divisis. It's not going to sound full. It's going to sound like you have, 4 different guys here, 4 different guys here. Yeah, for that to work, you need more players, and it needs to be more leaning toward the unison side, so it fills up more. So that's always been the biggest thing for me. And when we start to record that, the first thing I hear is, why does it sound so small? And so, well, because, it's just the way it was written. And I hate to say that because,
No, but yeah, arrangement comes first.
Yeah.
And then performance, and then the mix can help a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
There's a question from Miguel Angel asking, all right, when you deliver the mix before the mastering, if there's a track that goes to CD, to the album, that gets mastered, do you deliver at 0, right here,
okay,
at 0 dBs, -3 maybe, for the mastering engineer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For the mastering engineer, that becomes kind of a hard question to answer because my mixes they're not overloaded, but they're not quiet mixes either. My mixes can be pretty loud, as you'll hear on this one we'll play later, but never distorted, never overloaded. So, and I'm very conscious of that, to keep your eye and your ear on what you're doing. And I know there was a question about overloading the mix. When you start, things get louder and louder and louder and louder. The thing to do about that is in film, I don't know if you guys do this, but my room and my monitor pot is, if I set it a certain way, is calibrated for 85 decibels in the room. That's what the speakers are set up, and that's what I leave that there. That's 85. Obviously, the louder you make the faders, it's going to go above that. But that's my point. I don't constantly move my monitor pot around. I have my dim button set so it's like 15 dB lower. So if I hit my dim button, then I can hear what the mix is going to sound at a low level. So, what else?
So your tracks are, when you deliver your track is already semi-mastered.
My track is pretty much mastered.
Yeah.
The way I want it to be, and it's just up to the mastering engineer to do whatever magic they do. It's oddly enough, I was telling Mark here that I meet with mastering engineers every Wednesday afternoon for lunch, and there's about 20 of them there. So It's I hear a lot about this stuff about mixes they get from people like me. Not me in general, but people like this. So yeah. But yeah, so how does your master start? You're talking about
No, he was asking about where to start in terms of level, if 0 or less.
oh less,
Yeah.
less, yeah, yeah.
That's it.
Once you get beyond 0, you're going to start getting into trouble. It's okay if you get a little above it. That's not going to hurt. But when you start seeing red lights, yeah, back off. And what you might find is, as I said, mine is set at 85. Some guys will have their monitor pot down lower, which if your monitor pot is down lower, it's going to force you to push your faders up higher. So I would say set your monitor pot at a good level. If you have an SPL meter, set it, set up a template so you can, I don't know if you guys are working in, I assume you're just in stereo, right? All of you guys. SPL your speakers so that they're at a certain level and you're not going to go above that, So keep your monitor pot where you mark it at either 85, depending on the size of your room, smaller room, maybe 76, but set it and set your monitor pot there and don't start moving it. Just keep mixing and keep your eye on what's happening on your meters. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you use stereo speakers to play back? I mean, after you listen on the monitors, then do you play it back on like regular stereo speakers?
Yeah, my room is set up that I have a surround system and a pair of stereo speakers.
Okay.
Yeah, I do that because when I'm mixing a film, as opposed to mixing a record, which is basically just maybe 2 channels all the time. For me, mixing a film, I need to deliver 2 mixes. And one is the surround mix that goes into the film, and the other is the soundtrack mix, which is stereo. And I'm constantly going back and forth once I print my film mix the way I want it, then I'll go back and listen in stereo to the same mix to make adjustments for that. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question about compressors on orchestral mixes, and if any difference between when you apply compressor on sample instruments or orchestral real instruments.
Yeah, I do use a compressor on some instruments, not very often though. Primarily solo instruments in the orchestra that maybe need some help, like the trombones. A solo trombone sometimes could be a little pushback, so you want to bring that out. So basically, you want to raise the level, but you want to control the peaks on that. So I don't use a lot of compression on orchestral stuff. On percussion, yes, because the percussion can get kind of out of hand. The orchestra pretty much takes care of itself. What I do when I mix the final stem is I'll have an aux track that will have either an ML4000 on it or an L3LL maximizer. They're multi-band compressor limiters, which I'll use those on each stem. Because what happens now is because I get so many tracks from composers, it's gotten into this loud wars. Everybody wants to be louder than the other guy. So I get these scores and all these samples. It's basically it's the stuff that I have to mix against. It's their samples, but their stuff is so hot, so I have to get the live stuff equal to that or louder. So that's where these brick wall limiters come in.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but isn't there a regulation on radio and TV that has to do with a new algorithm that doesn't just account for, dB that the thing is coming in and such that you can't just compress, like you actually, if you were to compress your sound and limit your sound to the point where it was a brick wall, you would basically still clip the meter because they take sort of a cumulative average of loudness. There's like a new loudness standard.
I when I say brick wall, I'm not talking about slamming it to the top. No. By doing that, you lose all the air in the mix, and that's something you don't want to do. What you're doing is you're using that maybe to get gain and to not exceed a certain point. No, very, 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 very aware of that. You don't ever want to squash that down. So,
Okay.
so the brick wall limiter is not being used as a hard limiter that you'd use, say, on a rock track, where it just kind of sits there and stops everything. No, this is moving around because we're never exceeding a certain point. We're never getting over where, you start squashing the mix and losing the life of it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Any more?
Hey, Bobby, we got another question on the
Sure.
stream. Earlier, you mentioned your favorite reverbs being the TC6000
Yes.
and Lexicon 960. What if you were confined to just reverb plugins?
Altiverb would be fine. I think we lost you there. Yeah, Altiverb is one of my go-to plugins, and that's one of my favorite. When I don't have the hardware reverbs, Altiverb is my first choice.
Do you have a plugin for like algorithmic reverb that you like?
Well, I like in the Altiverb world, or
Well, or like an emulation of a Bricasti or something like that.
no, not really.
Okay.
No, not really. I don't have a favorite in that world. No.
Okay.
You always use your lexicons for digital reverb.
Oh, I have the lexicons, but as far as emulation stuff, I do. I'm sorry. Yeah, UA, the UA stuff, which is the lexicon 224,
Oh, okay.
or the EMT 250. I use those, and any of their the EMT plates, the 140s.
Mm-hmm.
I use those. Yeah, I use those. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
But those are they're different from the orchestra stuff, like the Altiverb stuff. The Altiverb stuff, I'll use something like the Concertgebouw, or I'll use the Disney Hall, depending upon what the actual score is. That's what you have to let the music dictate what you're going to do to it. Don't just say, oh, this I'm going to throw 8 seconds of reverb on it. No, just work. Listen to what's happening, then add the reverb to that. And all you want to do is enhance it, open it up, give it depth. You don't want to wash it out. So,
Right.
But the other stuff, the emulation stuff, I'll use on vocals, I'll use on rhythm stuff, I'll use on solo guitars and instruments like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else?
I have a quick question for
Sure.
you. I believe Marcus said something to this effect, and I'm not sure I heard the answer. When you are finishing a mix and you're sending it to mastering, what is your level that you're going to submit to the mastering engineer? 3 dB down, 10 dB down? What do you stick with?
It's probably about 3 dB down. Yeah.
Okay.
I can't say it's always the same, but that depends on the score too. But I try to be at least 3 dB down. Yeah. You're talking 3 dB down from 0 or 3 dB down from distortion?
Well, no, from 0 dB.
Okay. Yeah. Well, no, then in that case, I'm probably pretty much closer to 0 than 3. Depending upon what it is.
Well, is that because you're mastering it, or you're sending it out to a master?
That's because I'm competing against a bunch of full level prelay tracks that are insane. I do a good example was what was it, Battle LA? That was Brian Tyler sent me a bunch of stuff that was full level, and I had to get the orchestra above that. I mean, did it, but yeah. So at that point, you're basically competing with really loud prelay tracks, MIDI tracks. So what you have to do is you have to forget about everything you know about orchestras being spacious and stuff like that. All you want them to do is be up, loud, and powerful. And then there are sections where it's going to be real romantic or something. But for the most part, a score like that is loud and powerful. You need to just have the orchestra hit you as loud as the prelays are going to hit you. So at that point, I'm pretty close to 0. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah. What about though, if let's say somebody was to send you a track for mastering, would you want it at the same level? 3 dB down? Or
Yeah, 3 dB down would be fine. It'd be fine. Yeah. Okay. But that's the thing. I probably wouldn't be the guy to master it, because I'd probably muck it all up. I'd probably make it like, depending upon what the score was, what the track was. Yeah. I talked to one of the guys I have lunch with every Wednesday and have them, deal with it. Yeah. That's what they do. I'm not a mastering engineer. I'm a mix engineer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do try to send my mixes out as close to being mastered as possible. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I've heard different thoughts on that. So.
Yeah, I mean, we all, we have a certain way of working, and we're all going to send different stuff out. I mean, I hear from these guys that they get stuff that is almost impossible to handle because it's too loud. People just weren't paying attention to what they were doing, and they bring these tracks in, and they're so loud. I said, my tracks are never that loud. My tracks are loud, but they're never that loud. If you want your tracks to be loud, and set up a good level while you're mixing, and then turn your monitor pot up really loud so it hurts you. Then you'll go, that sounds pretty good, and then you're in a good ballpark. But no, just be very, very aware of where you're at.
Now much more to dynamics, I think. Wide range.
Yeah, that's the thing about that. You want the music to have dynamics. If you like we talked about brick wall limiter earlier, everything's going to just sit right there. If you listen to some of these pop records and you're watching the meters, they're sitting here and they're not moving anywhere. They're just sitting right there. You want to have, but that's designed that way. That music isn't supposed to have dynamics. But when you have an orchestral piece that goes from a whisper to thunder, like you need to have that breathing space in there. So yeah. So setting everything up so it's super loud isn't where they work.
It's definitely more complicated than rock and roll, I'll tell you.
You know what?
For me, it is anyway.
It kind of is. Yeah.
Okay, if I can ask another question, please?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Do you happen sometime to work on the? I'm sorry, I'm French, and sometimes I'm looking for my words.
Right. Okay.
Do you work only with really famous and talented composers, or do you happen sometime to work on newcomers' work?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if so, did you come except for the loudness war you just talked about? Did you come across mistakes that things we should think about, things we should avoid, that you want to share with us? Because we had some questions, and now I think we're reaching almost the end of the video meeting. So what do you want to tell us?
As far as things to avoid? Oh, that's hard for me to say to a composer, but the biggest thing that we find is that when I'm working on a session, is that we find composers coming in that are writing out of the range of the instruments. They'll write parts for a trumpet that are impossible to play, and then of course the orchestra has to tell them and say, this. I mean, it sounds great on a piano or on your synth keyboard, but we can't play that high or we can't play that low. So learning the ranges of the instruments. It's the same as I said early on, mixing, knowing where the instrument speaks and where it doesn't, and you can get rid of that. So, but writing for the instrument itself, you need to know the range of the instrument and where the guys can play. Otherwise, they're not going to play it, or they'll tell you they'll have to change it. They'll bring it down, put it in their range.
Right.
And
I can speak to that too. I mean, I had a session in Bulgaria this last summer with Conrad Pope, and
I know, a cool friend of mine. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm still a little bit of a newcomer. I mean, I've been in this for about 5 years, and I did it with a program in Seattle with Hummy Man.
Oh, yeah, another old friend of mine.
and I wrote a great cue for our final thing, but a lot of it was because I was modeling it off of another cue, and I had Hummy kind of holding my hand the whole time, telling me, "Oh, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that."
Yeah.
And this time I just went and did it myself. And when you hear samples, especially in woodwinds for some reason, they'll play in a range that isn't great, or it speaks too loudly. But you can dial it back and do all sorts of things with the samples, and then you hear it live. And I had one moment on the podium where I was like, "You need oboes. You need to take that whole section 8 VB," and they did it. And they just all of a sudden the whole woodwind section sounded like a section.
Yeah, that's just knowing where they're comfortable playing or where the instrument speaks at its best.
Yeah.
Mark and I were having a conversation earlier. This is an orchestration bit. Here was several scores that I had worked on in the past where we've had solo instruments in the orchestra. And a good example is, I always use this example. I was working with Jerry Goldsmith on a film, and we had rehearsed this cue 4 times. And at bar 17, there was a flute solo. And Jerry used to like to rehearse the orchestra without headphones. So he would listen to the room. So we rehearsed the cue 4 times. And before we go to the 5th time, Jerry said, there's a flute solo at bar 17. And so far I haven't heard it yet. And so we rehearsed it again. And first he said, if you don't hear it next time, you're playing too loud. So the next time we rehearsed it, it was fine. It was perfect. The flute solo was there. And that brought up a point when I was talking to Mark, is that other composers I've worked with basically thought I was lazy because I said, can you have everybody come down around the solo, whether it was an oboe, whatever it was, that can you have them come down at those bars so we can make room for this? And they said, why don't you just raise the mic? I said, I can raise the mic, but what's going to happen is you're going to hear everybody around him. You're not going to hear the instruments. I'm going to bring up the whole room. So I said, no, I'll just record it. So I recorded it, came in, listened to it. He said, let's hear it. I said, where's the solo? I said, right here. I pushed the fader up, and what he heard was exactly what I told him. He heard everybody in the room. He said, well, okay, I'll have him play louder. I said, don't have him play louder. Have everybody come down, because when you write a piece of music, as you guys are all composers, you know this, that when you write a piece of music, especially for solo, you have a sound in your head, an intent of what the sound needs to be. The minute you have the guy play louder or blow louder, it changes what you had originally. So have the orchestra come down. There's just several of that just gets into a conducting and recording range as far as things to do and not to do. But again, the most important thing is make sure you write in the range of the instrument, that you notate everything for these guys. Now, we have a USC class, a composer's class that we do. And at the end of every session, they have live musicians come in and we record the session. At the end of every session, we have a Q&A where all the students go out on the stage and they can ask the musicians questions, and the musicians will come back and say, you know what, at this, on your score here, you should have done this. It's a great learning process there. So, okay, what do we got?
Do you want to go over some of these
questions?
Yeah,
okay.
that you had.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but maybe
some
of them.
See. I've covered this one already. Do you use sensory reverbs and delays? Yeah, I use aux sends. We covered that already. Ideal level, we did that. Yeah. Oh yeah, I don't know who asked this question, but when you have an extremely dynamic section, for instance, soft strings to extremely loud, do you automate your inserts and sends to follow the dynamic levels of the track? Who wrote that one? Anybody know?
That would be me.
Okay. Actually, I really don't. I might automate the reverbs to come back a bit and then go back up for the big sections. But I treat it as if it were like, you expect from real orchestra, because you got, things go from a whisper to thunder, and you want to capture that. You don't want to keep changing things because you're going to hear it. So just let it be natural. Unless you're going for an effect, then you can, there are no rules at that point. And these basically are not rules. They're basically suggestions, what you can do, because every mix is going to be different.
Okay, so follow up on that. Would your suggestion be that that would be adjusting all of your inserts and sends at the loudest dynamic? If you have a dynamic,
you're talking about you're talking about a send on each, an insert on each track, right?
Correct. Any plugins, you would set those at the loudest dynamic of that particular track?
You're talking about the plugins or the return of the reverbs? The actual plugin?
Both.
Plugin? What?
Yes, both.
Both. The reverbs should be coming back up. What you want to do is adjust your returns. adjust the returns, not the sends, because you'll be going crazy trying to adjust all the returns on all those faders. So set it up where you have a good level and you're comfortable with that, and you're not overloading your reverbs. And then you can, if you want more reverb, just bring up your returns. And your returns, by the way, should be set at unity gain at 0 on your console or whatever you're doing. And then I would link them together so they work as a set. If you have 5 returns or 2 returns, link them together so you can just move one up and you can automate it to come up and come back down. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. What else?
Hey, Bobby.
Oh, yes.
How you doing? Thanks for doing this for us.
Yeah.
Quick question. Do you mono lower frequencies in general, mixing a record or a score, you know, like under 180?
Do I mono the low frequencies?
Yes, in general, in mixing music in general. Let it be a score or record.
The only thing I don't know about mono. I mean, I monitor mono every now and then to make sure I don't have any phase issues. But as far as monoing up stuff, no. I mean, I don't. The only thing that's really mono would be like subwoofer return, the LFE return.
Okay.
Because that low frequency stuff is so non-directional, and that just fills up. But I do tend to put low stuff in the center channel. I don't know if that qualifies it as being mono, but
right.
Let's be more specific. Like what would I mono? What did you have in mind?
Well, maybe some of the low percussion, so it's not as muddy, you know. I guess if you're going to the center channel, that helps a lot. Yeah,
what you can do with that is put your heavier stuff in the center.
Okay.
And then pan out from there. You don't want, I have the higher drums on the left and right side.
Mm-hmm.
So I get sort of an antiphonal effect if they're like field drums or snare drums. And the big stuff is in the center where the weight is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in the center, open it a bit, not too wide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you put your timpani was at 12 o'clock, and then you had the Grand Casa and a taiko on this side, they could be 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock. You know, so you have some space there, and then EQing those things so that you take some of the mud out, and always, you know, solo up the track, listen to it, then put it back in, take the solo out, and listen to see what you need to do to it. You know, you don't want to. What's going to happen if you start monoing up everything in the center channel? That center channel is going to overload. You're going to have too much stuff in it, so you have to spread it out a little bit. Now you're dealing in stereo or surround? Stereo. Right? Okay. Yeah. Well, you can. Yeah, put it in the center, but you might want to have to compress some of that stuff so it doesn't overload the channel. And then make sure that when you start loading that stuff on top of each other, that you can hear each element individually. Because that tends to, if you have a louder element over one, it's going to mask it. So you can get around that, again, by moving things to the left or to the right of your center. And you'll hear everything in detail, but you need to make sure that you're not going to cover something up. You want to be able to hear every element in the mix. Yeah. And
put
again,
cymbals to the side more.
Pardon?
Put cymbals to the side.
Oh, I can't. That you're breaking up there.
Cymbals to the sides. Cymbals to the sides.
Cymbals. Sometimes yes. Sometimes no. For me, it's a score by score or cue by cue thing as to where they are, but for the most part, they're off to the left and to the right. You know, unless the guy playing timpani has to hit a cymbal every now and then of course it's going to be in the center. That I have no control over. You know, so. But for the most part, I'll set them up so things are left and right because I like to take advantage of that whole stereo field or that, you know, that big wide sound stage that we have. Yeah. You don't want to start, once you start bunching everything up in the center or putting everything to the left and to the right, put everything to the left and to the right, what you end up with is two big monos. So you have this big, beautiful soundstage in stereo. So learn to pan things in between there. And you'll find that by adding different amounts of reverb to those elements, you're going to find that your mix is going to give you the impression of that there's some depth and you can actually walk into the mix. For me, that's a big priority is when I'm working on a mix, is that not this one I'm going to play for you, but my ideal mix is one that I get the sense that there's space enough for me to get up and walk into it, and that is established by where I pan things and the amount of reverb I put on the instruments. Yeah.
Somebody gave me a feedback one day to think about panning.
Yeah.
And mentioned the idea for transparency to a little bit artificially to align instrument by frequency. So in one line of array, if you got 2 or 3 level of depth, you don't have the same frequencies in one line. So
yes.
For example, you would move the flute maybe a little bit towards the cello.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit, and you can actually change their position by adding a little more reverb to this one here, a little farther back, and then pull this one a little less reverb. It'll sound closer. So you're getting that distance, and they're not sitting on top of each other. And pan them. Try to avoid panning things on top of each other. You know, because like I say, if you have a big wide space, you know, I'm not saying put them left and right wide, but try to fill up all the space in there and still make it sound natural, unless it's a you know, a techno thing where you want things to be kind of everywhere. Then do whatever you like with that. That it, guys?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Sorry, one last thing. I think there's a lot of software plugins that are analyzers, whether like spectrograms, whether it's different types of goniometers, or I don't know, whatever it is. What do you find? Is there anything that you do as a final check once the mix is done? Anything you just run just to visually look at something or look at numbers and see if there's any issues you might have?
Well, I use the Duro meters. I have that to keep me, you know, to keep me honest.
The Duro meters,
the
waves one.
Yeah, I use those to keep me honest. I have that stuff. No, one thing, because a lot of what I do is film work. So there are 2 things I need to keep that I actually have when I mix film. Obviously, the most important is a picture, because I'm not mixing a radio show. So then you have to have the dialogue, and you have to have any effects that are available, the temp effects, because dialogue, you need to know where to stay out of the way. Effects, you need to know what you're going to be mixing against, because you have a lot of big boomy effects and your score is big and boomy. You're going to be mixing against that. So you need to know what frequencies to take out, what frequencies to add, or what you're going to be dealing with. Now, that being said, I did mention they were temp effects, so that could change by the time we get to the final dub stage. But at least you'll have, the music will have a fighting chance of staying there. But that's what I listen to. I listen to the mix completely, and I always check the mix with dialogue and the effects. And of course, there are certain things on the picture that you need to pay attention to. And if someone asked the question about, do I mix, is my film mix different from my stereo soundtrack mix? And for the most part, no. But there are times when I go back and forth, and my console set up here so I can listen to the sound, the full surround. Then I can monitor the stereo mix and to find out if anything's coming out or imaging is shifting, that kind of stuff. But there are a couple of things that happen when you're mixing a film, is that you need to be really aware of this, is that you're watching a film, so you have a visual connection to what's happening on the screen. And sometimes there are sound elements that are specific to something on the screen. So it might be a little louder than normal. So which is good for the scene, because if you're sitting at the theater, you go, well, that's crazy. But you don't want that to happen when you're sitting at home with your headphones on or something and you got freaked out because a big sound came in. No, I tend to lower stuff like that. Not much, but it still has an effect.
So you mentioned about with FX and you might be mixing relative to the effects that are there. So if the effects are, well, it's kind of a small two-part question, but are you're working with effects? So does effects come before or after? And if it does come after, where you have the effects and then you're sitting and you're composing / mixing, then are you going to actually orchestrate differently and maybe get with the frequencies and the ranges in mind of certain instruments, take that away because you're dealing with certain effects?
No, what I'm talking about the sound effects in a film. That's what I was referring to. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I'm also like working with a sound designer, and they might have some rumbles, or they might have some little things here and there. So
yeah, that's something that I just have to be aware of. I'm not doing anything drastic for that. I just need to be aware of what's happening so that I can mix the score appropriately, so I can stay out of the way of some of that stuff. So when you're sitting in the theater, you get like this clashing, booming stuff against the music. Now you need to be very aware of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone?
Do you want to show something from?
Yeah, you guys want to see this track, and then we can talk about it for a minute. Then I'll show you the screen. Can you guys? Can I see that yet?
I'll do it for you real quick.
Good.
There we go.
There you guys. Now you know that this you're going to be hearing mono, right? You told them mono, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's what the program does. So. Want to put that back into.
Right.
Hey, the mic is muted.
Ah, sorry.
All right.
Okay.
Up and running.
Sorry, guys. Okay.
Thanks.
So let's start over again. We talked about when I have a loud passage or a soft passage, and do I adjust that? No, there were no adjustments here. What happens is the orchestra has recorded that, and I let, the orchestra has that, it's written, so it's supposed to get soft, and I don't want to write anything up. I don't want to change that dynamic, because it works against what's coming up next, where you see the vampire jump down and it hits you in the face. You want to have that. And again, the reverb levels there are the same. We didn't write anything. I didn't change anything. It's just that there's not any level hitting the reverb. They're playing softer, so you're not sending a lot of there. But when they play louder, it's hitting the sends more, so you're hearing that. And this is what the cue is. I mentioned that if you guys were listening to the percussion, some of the samples that they sent me have so much reverb on them, I couldn't do anything with it, and I didn't want to have the orchestra match that, or you wouldn't hear anything but a big wash. There's so much happening in this. We've got synth pulse going on. We've got percussion going on. We've got crazy strings going on. So there's a lot happening. This cue sounds like a freight train just out of control going down the tracks. So there's a lot to contend with on this to make it sound full and yet articulate. So that's where the shorter reverbs come in. And you didn't notice that when we got down to being quiet, even with that same short reverb, it didn't take away from the fact that there was still reverb on those tracks and it still had space to it. So, yeah. Any questions on that? Okay. So we share the screen now?
Yeah.
I'm going to change screens for you guys. Okay. Can you see the mix window now? Okay. So this is my stereo. This is my stereo mix being folded down. But we start here. This is the master, and this is the orchestra stem, which has an LFE on it, which has the low air plug-in on it. For this one here, we have the Altiverb on it, and then you have Revive on it, which is again not one of my favorite reverbs. And as I was telling, the aux sends, these are the aux sends that I use. You see, there's nothing. This is reverb 2, and nothing being sent to reverb 2. It's all reverb 1 right now. Again, reverb 1. And then we get into other reverbs here. Let's go to the end. Now, these are the prelay tracks that they sent me. And if you look up here, there's reverb on the first 2, then there's nothing here. There's reverb on the last one, which is a pulse. But because there's so much reverb on these tracks here, which is the brass, the high perk, and all this stuff up to here, it sort of defeats the purpose to add more reverb on top of it. It's just going to make it worse. So I have to make that stuff work in the context of what's happening with the orchestra. So, guys, have any questions about this particular setup?
Was it problematic that they sent you the prelays with reverb?
Oh yeah, we can. Yeah. Okay. Here is let's solo these guys up. I'm gonna move the picture out of the way for the moment. Okay. And let's do this. Let's yeah. Okay. So we'll solo up these tracks here. If you guys can you guys hear that percussion track? So that's all reverb that was sent to me. That's not added. I'm not adding any of that. And then the other one here. And that's something I specifically ask that they not do. Don't send me stuff with that much reverb on it. You can add a little reverb on it, but give me something to work with. And that I can't work with. It just has to go in the mix the way it is. Yeah. So yeah. Another thing here is I'll go forward and go back to the top of the mix. There's a section here where I've actually split these tracks off. What happens with stuff like this is that.
Let me change the screen one second.
Oh, yeah. Good. Oh, back. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, guys. I'm going to go to this track here. What happens a lot of times is I'll get stuff like this. These elements were on the same track. You see where I broke them up. So we start here. That's what you're going to hear. That bass there. Then that is something that you really shouldn't do. If you have sounds that are that different, don't put them on the same track, because if someone like me gets them, I'm going to have to do exactly what I did there. You're going to have to break the tracks up, because the effect that I would put here would not be the same I would put on this. So that's basically what you need to do, is be aware of it. So it eats up another track. So what? That's okay. But this kind of stuff is just be aware that sounds that are so different should be separated. They should not all be put on the same track. But, you know, it's something that I expected from these guys, seeing as how they gave me all the reverb on their plugins. So, yeah. So, yeah.
I had a quick question about your on that setup there with the LFEs.
Yeah, sure.
I just had to look that up. I actually haven't used an LFE before in any of my mixes. Is that's a specific woofer speaker or some other types of low end effects speaker that you actually have to route it to, right?
Yes, a subwoofer.
Okay. Do you recommend possibly, even if you don't have a 5.1 setup, to do a stereo,
you can do 2.1
subwoofer setup?
Yeah, 2.1. Absolutely.
And that's helpful for your mixing. You find that to be helpful to be able to have the bass in a place in a specific.
Well, it depends on what the actual release form is going to be, what the end product's going to be. Is anybody ever going to hear that subwoofer other than you?
Well, but I'm saying, would it help me mix my track better for other things to have the subs all in that place?
That would be a separate channel, though. That's the thing. It wouldn't be stereo any longer. Well, you could do it bass management wise, where you would go into the sub, and the sub would have two outs. You'd have left and right out of the sub. So everything you take your mix going into the sub, and then go to your left right speaker, and then you could set it up so that the subwoofer has frequency settings. So you can say, okay, everything above 85 will go to the main speakers. Everything below 85 will go to the sub. You can hear that. Whatever frequency, you can say 120, everything above 120 goes to my left and right. Below 120 goes to my subwoofer. And it's still getting printed to your stereo mix, but you're hearing everything below a certain frequency through that subwoofer.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah. That's bass management. And that works well for what you have. For your stereo mix and your two speakers.
Yeah, I mean, I have the Yamaha HS80s, and I thought about just adding something to them.
Yeah, just add a subwoofer. Yeah, but look at the subwoofer. Make sure your subwoofer has two ins and two outs, because you need to go into it out of your stereo and into it. You need to go into a stereo, then out stereo to your speakers, and the subwoofer needs to have a frequency selector on the back of it. So you can say, okay, everything below 100, 120, or 100 or 85, will go to the subwoofer. Everything above that goes to your speakers.
Okay, and which cut frequency would you advise? 85, 100, 120?
Yeah. I have it. Yeah. That's what,
No, but
let me show you this. Let me show you my my LFE here. Okay, let's go back to it. Okay, and let's go back to.
Because right now I just use a bunch of panels in my room for bass management.
Well, yeah, well, that's well, this room is set up the same way, so you need that. Yeah, you do need that for your room. But okay, so here's the low air. You guys can see that, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So what I normally do is I'll take this and let's move this down here. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and add this. Might be a little loud for you guys, but okay. And that's how I set up to make sure that everything below 85. And of course you can set your range here, 85. So everything below 85 is going to go to this to my low air, and that's going to come back on a separate channel, my LFE channel. It's sending from here. This is the LFE channel. This is just the master. Don't worry about that, but you can see that for film we have a separate LFE channel that they can choose to use. They can raise, they can lower, or they can create their own. But I normally send off my mixes with this channel 6 or the 0.1 channel has an LFE in it. Okay, does that make sense to you guys? Or...
Yeah, that's great. I think that's actually a good reason to maybe get a subwoofer and mess around with the mixing.
Yeah, yeah, and then you can sort of mess if you know everything below 100, below 120 will go to your subwoofer. Everything above 120 goes to your main speakers. So, but for film, I have it set at 85. So, you guys can experiment with it to what works well for you. And then the best thing to do is if you can use this and try a couple of different cutoff frequencies, write them all down as you print your mix, and then take that mix somewhere else and listen to it. Don't listen to it in the same room because that defeats the purpose. If you know someone that has a room that you trust or someone that or a place you want to listen to it, take it there and listen to it and see what it sounds like. And that's the best thing. That's the equivalent of us mixing records and going out to the car and listening to them on a cheap cassette player, So thank God we don't do that anymore. But
yeah, I mean, toning down bass and understanding how to mix bass is probably the hardest thing for me, just because I'm trying to always trust what I hear. Do you recommend doing those room treatment microphone, the point mic room treatments where you actually take a sort of a reading of your room and adjust your speaker's EQ accordingly?
Yeah, I haven't really used that system. I actually had a guy come into my room, a tech that works in some of the major studios, and he came in because I told him I had a small room, and people wanted to start mixing film here, and I never built this room to mix film in. I only built this room so I could get at my Pro Tools sessions and work. But anyway, he came in, set it up, and he spent about 2 hours here. This TEP system, sorting out the room, shooting tones, and everything. At the end of it, he said the room is fine. Whatever you did right. And they said you have 1 dB down at 10K, and then you have a 1 dB bump at 40 hertz. And he said that's basically nothing. So we can spend $3 grand and put a digital EQ in here and set it up for you, but why? The room's fine, as long as you're aware of that. So
yeah.
Just have someone to come in and listen. As far as my speakers go, what I do is I have a calibration session that I put up, and basically it's 6 channels, all with peak noise, which is let me get that back to that again. Let's get that. That's what I calibrate my speakers with, or SPL my speakers with. That pink noise is what I set my monitors at 85. Now, what I do there is with that, and you can do it in a stereo mode as well, is just, again, set your monitor pot at a certain point. If you guys have these SPL meters, you used to be able to get at Radio Shack, but Radio Shack doesn't exist anymore. But other places have them, and they, this is what it looks like. And what it does, it allows you to, for me, I set it at 80. You see that there? And then all my faders at unity gain, so all at 0. Open up the first one, open up my left monitor, set that with the SPL meter right where my head is. That's where you need to set. You need to set it right where you're sitting, and set that up so that it reads. And don't stand behind the meter, because that changes I stand to the side of it, and set that up at 85. Turn your monitor up so that you see your little meter on the SPL. So this thing starts hitting here at 85. You want it at 85. It's going to bounce around a bit, but don't worry about it. As long as it's dancing around 85, that's fine. You're done with that, mute that one, leave the monitor pot in the same position. Go to the next speaker. Don't change the monitor pot. What you need to do is, if you have level controls on your speaker, or if you have something on a console that you're using, adjust that there. Don't change the monitor pot because you've already set it for 85 on the left speaker. You need to adjust your right speaker with whatever level controls are on the back, if you have them at all. If you don't, then you've got to figure out some way to balance them out. But this way, it'll give you an idea that your speakers are balanced. If you're hearing the same level on both speakers, it'll make your mixes sound better. People say, well, I asked that question. Well, you guys, have you SPL'd your speakers? Nope. Why? Well, they're powered speakers. Well, that doesn't make a difference, if they're powered speakers or not. It's electronic. Things are going to shift. This is not going to always be 0, and it's going to shift a little bit. So when I'm working on a project here, I come in the morning, put the template up, listen to it, and make sure they're all the same. And every now and then I may have to recalibrate a speaker by dB or so. But that just means that they're electronic. Things are going to shift. So you need to check them when you start a mix and when I'm in the middle of a mix. I mean, every morning I'll come in before I start my mix to make sure everything's working. So, yeah.
Forgive my sort of silly question here, but we said you use this term a lot, the monitor pot. What is that?
Monitor pot. Let's see.
The sound level of the.
It's a level. It's the level on the console that turns your monitor up and down.
Okay, so in like my case, my Universal Apollo.
Yes, it's your level control.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's been called a monitor pot but yeah, that's what it is. It's a level control.
Okay, so it's the levels from that source, but you can also change the levels on your monitors from the back of the monitor.
Yes, yes, but start with with one monitor. Start with your left monitor. Set that to 85.
85 dB.
85 decibels. If you have a smaller room, you can set it to 76. Okay. But you want to have, you can set it. Actually, you can set it for whatever. Don't go beyond 85. That'd be crazy. But for us, film standard is 85. Now I've got 5 speakers around me, and they're all set at 85 right now. I used to set the backs for 82, and then you mono them up, and they become 85. But they're all just 85 at this point. The subwoofer's 92.
And the way you know that it's at 85, sorry, there's a lot of questions, but I'm trying to actually maybe do this test, is you take this SPL device and you can actually tell with pink noise. You were using pink noise.
Yeah, it tells you. It'll this little meter here.
Yeah.
If you can see that little meter will read at 85. If you set this at 80, then obviously that 0 point is your 80. And then at 0 point your 80, then back up in here, that'll be 85. So you want to be in that range. Now, if you want to be less, you can put that at 70 and then make it 75 or 76, what's ever comfortable for you at a loud point. But I guarantee if you set it at 85, your mixes, you're not going to be overloading your mixes. it'll be loud.
And you position it in front of the speaker.
No, not in front of the speaker. Set this up. I took it off the stand though. I have it on mic stand, and it sits right where my head is. Right, it sits right here where I'm mixing, and that's where it should be.
Oh, and then you'd solo the speakers.
Solo each track. Yeah, you would only have, if you get the subwoofer, you'll have just 2 channels anyway. You'll have 2 tracks, and put a noise generator from Pro Tools in there. Yeah. And you can set it up so you have 85, with pink noise, and then set it up 85. And remember, once you set the left speaker and you go to the right speaker, don't move that level control. I'll call it level control instead of monitor pot, so I don't confuse anybody anymore. So that we won't. It's the level control on whether it's an Apollo or you have, whatever your
interface.
Yeah, the interface. Yeah, you have, your interface. You want to make sure that your left speaker, you calibrated that at 85. Go to the next speaker, but your monitor, your pot, your level control, put a piece of tape there, put a little mark there so you know that is 85. Don't change it. Go to the next speaker. And then you can, if that's reading high or low, you can have a friend back there, say, okay, bring it up, bring it down, whatever, that kind of stuff. So you get it right.
The Apollo will light up for you, so you actually can see based on the amount of that it's lit up, that where the sort of the level is. But I guess
I don't know how accurate that is for like being directly on dB
on the mark.
Yeah. So that's why you need to do it with this. This is very accurate.
Okay.
That's what you need to do.
Could I get one of those at like Fry's, probably Fry's Electronics or something?
Oh, you probably could. Yeah, would be the same kind because this is Radio Shack's own brand, Realistic. So I've had it for years, and it's been one of my best investments.
Bill posted a link to the chat.
Yeah.
A couple of links.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, absolutely.
Photo, video.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions about how I set up the auxes or how that works? Yeah. So when I mention the auxes, I can send different amounts of reverb level to each instrument if I have to do that.
Yeah, Bobby, would you mind going over that just a little bit, just to clarify some of those?
Do what?
Going over how you set up your auxes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just a little more detail.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got to go back to this screen again. Sorry, guys. Okay, yeah. What I do is I start off with an Excel spreadsheet. And what I do is I list all the stems that I have. Okay, so I have, this is one stem, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes all the way out to H. So what I do is I set up, each stem has to have its own reverb. So in setting that up, you need to know that, okay, you have send A, send B, and so there are 2 sends to A, 2 sends to B, 2 sends to D, so all the way down the line. And if you'll, okay, some of these are only single reverbs because it's just a prelay track, but on the other stuff, you'll have 2 reverbs here and here. And there's one missing here. This was a hardware reverb, but yeah. So setting them up. Let's go to. I don't know if you guys can see this window here. These are how I set up all my stems. Now, this session that you're looking at here, this session was never printed in, because at the time I mixed this film here, every one of these tracks here is an aux track, so you can't record on it. What was happening here was, behind me there was another Pro Tools rig that I was recording to, and so that would get printed there. Nothing got printed on this rig. This was only a mix session template that I was balancing everything here, and everything got printed there. When it got printed, it got printed to the master stem of each one of these. So it was printed into, what do we have, 8 tracks? Yeah, okay. And let's see if I can, okay, here we go. So I set up all these reverbs here, and go into your auction. You can, I just labeled them A, B, C, D, but what I do at times, okay, this would be Orchestra 1, Orchestra 2, Choir 1, Choir 2, and so on, and so on. You label them that way. And if I was using something like, which I didn't have connected for this right now, is be like the TC. This goes out and comes back in again. These are going out to the devices, coming back in. So as far as setting that up, I would just add, find something that doesn't have one. And this is the part of the orchestra. So I just go here, and then this is Orchestra Verb 2, okay. And Orchestra Verb 2. So that's basically how you set it up. You have to create the aux first, and then assign it to the track that you want it to be on. So I could basically, send any of these auxes. It could be assigned to any of the reverbs, but you want the reverb that's going to be specific to where it has to go, which is right here, Orchestra 1 and 2. So be very careful of that. You don't want to end up having reverb, say an orchestra reverb, going to a synth track or a vocal track, and that's something you need to be very, very aware of when you're mixing. Like what I do is that when you have a stem that's labeled orchestra, when you listen to that stem, that's all you should ever hear. You should not hear anything other than orchestra. Same with the percussion. I listen to percussion stem. All I want to hear is percussion. Granted, it's in the room live, so you're going to hear a lot of other stuff, but you're going to hear mainly percussion. When you go to the choir stem, all you want to hear is choir. When you send this stuff out, and I'll show you what we talked about, being printed onto another rig. All the highlighted tracks here that you see here highlighted, those are the tracks that are printed on the other rig, so that when you look at the other rig, all you're going to see are these tracks here. That's all you're going to see. None of this other stuff matters anymore. It's just been printed. So you need to be sure that all your aux sends are assigned to the proper stem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there any other question? Can I explain this a little differently, or?
Yeah, we're gonna go for some of the last questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby.
Hey,
Yeah.
Bobby, could you just real quick, just to clarify this, because I'm still having a hard time following this.
Yeah, Tom.
Can you just pretend like, okay, show us the route that this signal is flowing?
Oh, sure, sure.
Okay. I mean, I think that would help clarify it for me.
Yeah, okay. So
sorry that I'm not catching on to this.
That's okay. So I need to make, let's say, what is this here? So let's go with the piano or something, where that's going to go orchestra. So let's go, you want to make an aux send. So I go up here and I go, okay, so I'll go, okay, up here. So, okay, let's, a new path, and that keep going up. A new path would be a stereo. And then I would call this, let's call this Orc Verb 3. So that's now become Orchestra Verb 3. And we'll create that. That's going to be at the bottom of the list. So I can bring that up. And there's Orc. I'll put it by the orchestra so you can see that. So that's stereo, Orc Verb 3. You got that part so far? Okay. So once you've made that and it sits here, it's under bus. Right? and it's not going out anywhere. It's internal. Yeah, if you got the best way as described to my students is that between buses and inserts is that buses are like if you're in a little city, you take a bus, you never leave the city, you're just going internally. And the buses are just internal. When you get to externals, then you're leaving the town. You're catching a plane, you're catching a train, you're going somewhere else. The externals here would take you out to another device and then back in again. So yeah, we got that. And then we go to, okay, so we want to send this stuff to ORC3. So you come up, you find your piano, you've got your aux sends already open here. And I can show you how that, you can show that. Now they're going. I don't. So you have 5 aux sends here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this one here. I get it closer to the piano. So that'd be 1, 2, 3. 3 would be here. Okay. And you see it up here?
Mm-hmm.
Click on that. That shows up there. And I can just option click and 0. Then I can option click and then drag it across here. So now I have 2 sends for the piano.
Okay, so
piano. Sorry, I was one off. It goes this way. This is piano here. Okay, sorry. Yes.
So you have a bus for your instrument, and then all of these other same colored faders are all your sends.
These here?
Yes.
Oh, these are all instruments. They're color coded as sections. This is percussion.
Okay, I see what you got.
These are prelay. This is all the stuff that I wasn't quite happy with, but it worked. Then you have keyboards here, harp and keyboards here. Harp 1, harp 2, piano, high, low, and celeste. Then I do that for my own sanity, because if it was all the same color, I'd go nuts trying to find stuff. So then you have the brass, starting with French horns to tuba. Then you have flutes from flutes to the bassoons. Then you have these are woodwind overhead microphones for the sections. And then you come over to the strings. These are all strings here. And they added a sub mic to this. This was, I guess, I didn't record this. It was just sent to me. And this is the Decca tree in the room. Okay. And one thing I didn't mention to you guys is these are all VCAs. I don't know if you guys are mixing with VCAs yet or not, but the advantage of VCA is that sold somewhere.
What does that stand for? Sorry.
The VCAs?
Yeah.
Okay, VCAs are you can group all these instruments. Like here's the room microphones, right? I can do that. I can move them around.
If
as a group, but then I can go in individually and then maybe just do this, lower that, raise this, that, the surrounds there. But if it's not on a VCA, here's what happens. Let's just take that. Okay, no group. Now it's just on its own. So if I want to touch that, let me put the groups back in again. If I want to touch that, it's going to take them all down. And that's not what I want. If I do that, then I have to hold the control down and then do that. But if it sits in a VCA, then this is the master for all of them. And then you can go in and individually tweak them. Now, I like to do this a lot, always on my drum kit. So I have a VCA for the drum kit because, once you get your drums all balanced out, you may just want to, you have one VCA to control the whole level, but you might say, hey, the hi-hat was a little high, a little loud, so I can bring that down. And you're not going to bring everything up and down as if they were tied into a single group. So VCAs for me are a big deal because I get to move sections at a time. And then like with the strings here, I can move all the strings, or the violins, violins. But yet I can go in and reshape the balance of them if I have to, and not move them all at the same time. Now, if I want to come over, say the cello, I want to do something with the cello as well. That let's see where I can see them on the same screen.
Hmm.
Yeah, here we go. So if I want to move them, then I can move them as a unit. Or say the first cello has a solo, then I can just come over here and grab that.
And automate or
And
rate.
automate it. Yeah, I'll automate that, and then set my glide times back to something a little. So it's dependent upon what the score is. I don't want these, to release the fader, especially if it's a very legato cue, and cello's playing. I release the fader, goes like that. You'll hear it. So I set it up so that when
the glide time.
Set the glide time. So when I release the fader, it comes down naturally. So it blends back into the orchestra. Yeah. If it was a pop record, then I would, at a faster tempo, then I would set it up so that you would hear it. We wouldn't hear it, but it'd be more in tempo with what was going on. This way, setting it at like about 2,500 milliseconds to 3,000 milliseconds, it allows it to breathe and move with the music.
Cool.
Does that help with the? I'm sorry, you'll back up on the auxes. Did that make sense on the auxes? I can still go back and explain more. Yeah.
Well, I had a little side question about that, which is if so it sounds like you're doing mostly these instrument tracks where you're sending things to an aux. Are you ever just busing a track or busing a set of tracks to an aux where all the signal is going?
That's what this is right here. If you look at this right here, these here,
yeah,
they're all going to says BP. That stands for big percussion.
And are those somewhere else? Where are those in your?
They go right.
Where are those? Those aux tracks.
It goes to big percussion. It goes to percussion right here.
Okay, so you do have these submix things, and you.
Yeah. Well, these are the final mixes here. These are the mixes that are going to go to the dub stage. That's what you're going to hear in the film. So you take like all these tracks here. Like all this stuff here. From here, let's go. Even the Decatry, all the way out to to here. I didn't have a separate keyboard stem, but all these tracks here, if you look up here, they're all going to something called A orchestra. Click on that. That's going to the A orchestra bus. So that A orchestra is this main track right here. That's where that's going.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, normally, when I talked about a limiter and what I put on that, normally, if this was a record track, an audio track, and it was in record, I could not have these plugins here because they would mute the minute you put in an input or it started to record. So what I normally do is when I'm printing in the box, just to the right of this will be an aux track, will be a 5.1 aux track that I will have instantiated. This is my EQ for that stem. And
I like the man.
And this is my limiter for that. And that's what I have for this particular stem. And that will run across all the stems. This one, this one, this one. So I try to remain consistent so it doesn't sound too out of whack. On some of the other stuff, like some of the prelays, I'll add maybe a different EQ or a different compressor or limiter on that stuff. But for like the acoustic stuff, I like to keep that stuff as similar as possible. Yeah.
Do you like the ML 4000, the limiter?
Yes. Yeah, I use that one, and I use the L3 LL waves. Yeah, they're both multi-band compressors or limiters. And I find that I can, if I have an issue with, say, a certain frequency range, well, then we can go in and play with it right here. You can do that. You can either pull the low end down or low mids up, or up or down. And you can play with all this stuff. And basically what you're doing is you're just limiting those frequencies and leveling it out. And this is sort of like my mastering chain. So this is the last step before it gets printed. And
all right, Bobby. We went right after 2 hours.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Time went by fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really fast.
Yeah.
We have to save some questions for the next masterclass.
Yeah. Well, I'm good. I'm good for. If you are, I'm good for a bit longer.
I'm good.
Okay.
If you've got some.
Yeah. Any more questions,
Maybe
guys?
you have, guys.
Yeah, this is Kolya. I finally got Zoom to work on my iPad.
Yeah.
Quick question for the surround monitoring volume. Do you use your Icon console, or do you use any specific surround monitoring controller like one of those SPLs?
Well, when you're talking about monitoring, did you hear when I was talking about SPLing my speakers?
Yes. What I'm talking about now is basically a volume knob, to adjust the monitoring listening volume on all speakers at the same time.
Oh yes, I have that. It's the monitor. I won't say monitor pot, but the level control on the console is the same as you'd find on any console. You have a monitor pot control, which controls the speaker levels to all the speakers, including the subwoofer. So it's basically controlling 6 channels of audio. Yeah.
Okay, so using the one on the console versus
Yes.
a specific hardware unit for that.
No, it's the console. I don't use.
Okay.
It's the same.
And-
Yeah. It's the same. I'm sorry. You finish first.
Oh, sorry. No, you go ahead, Bobby, first. So the same as.
It's the same as if I was working in, say, if I was at Warner Brothers or Record Plant or anything. All those consoles have a monitor pot on them or volume control, and that basically controls the level of all the speakers around. Yeah, you need to have it. It needs to control everything, because if you want to bring the level down, say you want to check a passage at a low level, it sort of defeats the purpose by it not controlling everything. It has to control all the speakers, so everything comes down together. Yeah.
Right.
The hardware
Okay, thanks.
matter, or did you?
I use that occasionally.
But
Yeah.
but you can also do it in.
Oh yeah.
In Pro Tools. Just.
Mark was asking a question about, do I use Panner? Let me see if I can get that for you. Yeah, let's see. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, that's a hardware panner. And I'll, when I'm really going crazy and automating something, I'll use that. And a good example is I was working on a film where these guys were going across the, I guess, the Arizona the desert or something. And they were paramedics, and they were carting this guy who was a drug dealer that had ripped off all these other guys, and he had swallowed all these bags of heroin. And so they're basically getting him to the hospital, going to the desert, and these other guys, the bad guys, are chasing him. So there's a scene at that point where they sort of catch him, and the paramedics ambulance thing starts to roll over, and the whole thing's in slow motion. So what I did with the panner is I got the score, and I just kind of followed the picture and followed where that, as it was turning over, and followed it that way. So it gave the music a sense that it was spinning around in the room as the thing was spinning around inside the ambulance. So, but I that's one of those crazy things, and I use it every now and then when I have to move things around. Yeah.
And the other question I have, Bobby, is you spoke about the issues you had when there was too much reverb on the prelay, especially the percussions. Did you ever see yourself turning to deverb plugins to remove reverbs in those situations?
No, I haven't. I don't know how well it works. I mean, if you guys have any input on that, because that's something I have to say that I have not used.
No, I haven't. That's why I'm asking. I have no experience.
Oh yeah,
with those.
no, I don't know.
Something new I just came across a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
The
How's it work?
ROM.
Does it work pretty well?
It seems to work much better than most of the standard deverbs. It's something called FrayROM, which is made by Sonoblay, I think.
Yeah.
And I was actually pretty impressed with the ability to remove the ambient sound.
Really? Does it?
It's not perfect, but it does.
Okay. It doesn't flatten out the sound though, does it?
No, that was the thing that was most impressive about it. It's actually the whole reason I got the plugin.
Oh, great.
Was, the demo I saw.
Well, I'll look into that. Thanks. Because you see what I have to deal with at times, and that's
yeah
crazy. And even though I yeah, you can always say, please don't send any reverb on your plugins and or prelays, and I get it anyway. So.
I've heard. I actually worked closely with a sound designer who's said praises with Isotopes RX.
I use Isotope RX, and that's an amazing plugin because for me it removes. It's helped me get rid of noise, get rid of clicks, get rid of stuff that's happening in the background. Yeah, I recorded a choir where people kept stamping their feet while they were singing, and I ran it through RX and get rid of all that stuff. Another thing that it really did was the same choir I was talking about. I recorded the choir in a surround, and I sent it off to the composer. And then a week later, I get a call from the assistant saying, "Hey, this choir is all distorted. Can you clean it up for us?" And I said, "Well, the choir that I sent you wasn't distorted, and it was the surround channel. What do you have?" "Oh, we folded it down to stereo." And so they totally ruined. Anyway, I got the track, and I ran it in through RX, and I was amazed because when you get into digital distortion, it's an ugly sound. Isotope cleaned it right up. It was, although it was still a stereo track, but there was no artifacts, no evidence that it had ever been digitally distorted. I mean, really clean tracks. Really pretty. I bought it that same day. Bought it the same hour. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, I see you're using an Icon D console, which was flagship back then. Would you have any desire to upgrade to an S6?
I'm so comfortable here. I mean, I would like to, but I'm so comfortable here. Besides, I don't want to spend $60,000 again
on a controller. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if Avid was kind enough to loan me one for a year, I'd say, sure, of course. Yeah. But no. This does exactly what I need it to do. I've mixed, 100 or so films on this thing. And, I like the fact that, faders, and that's how I started. So I do mix a lot in the box when I'm not sitting in this room, but it's nice to get in here and actually grab faders and move things. For me, mixing is all about the feel of the piece. I'm not one for letting faders sit there or static or drawing lines of automation in. That's really not, but if it's a pop piece or a techno piece where things just sit there, but orchestral pieces and live pieces like that, they need to breathe. They need to have something. And I find myself making moves with orchestral pieces where maybe there wasn't enough of a crescendo or decrescendo. I write that stuff in. But I'd love to, back to the original, I'd love to, but I'll stay with this.
I mean, if you're happy with something, why change? And it's an awesome piece of gear, so no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on the S6 and it's great, but I'd rather stay here and have $60,000 in my pocket.
Exactly. Not in Avid's pocket.
At Avid's pocket, exactly. Yeah. You guys have any more questions?
Hey, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the session, by the way.
Well, I hope you guys had a good time. I hope I made sense when I try to explain stuff to you guys. But Mark will, I think you're going to leave a link for me so these guys can contact me.
Yeah, definitely.
So he'll give you my email address and contact. So if you have any questions about mixing further on, just shoot me an email and with your specifics as to what you have in mind, and I'll get right back to you.
And I will say hello to Conrad from you. Conrad is a friend of mine.
Oh, is he? Yeah, Conrad's a great guy. Love Conrad. Yeah.
All right.
Great writer, great orchestrator. He's one of the best. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Let me see you guys for a second.
Okay.
Let me just change the.
I'm going to
see you all. All right. So we can say bye-bye. All right. Thank you all for being here today. It's been a great chat. Thanks, Bobby. Fantastic. And have a good one, everyone. All right.
I hope you guys got something out of this. If you have any more questions, like I say, I see some surround mix stuff there. What's that one? That last one there.
I can email them to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's fine. Just stay in contact with me, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
See you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.